We're going to start on a serious note. Deshaun Watson yesterday talking with media members for the first time since he was introduced as the Browns quarterback, reiterating and maintaining his innocence against allegations. Now that New York Times report came out, there are now the report out saying that he booked appointments with at least 66 different women. And just this week, we find out that there are now additional women a part of that civil lawsuit against him. So that number is now up to 24 women, if I've got my math right there. And so I'll say this, what I was thinking about this, Ike, is if you're Roger Goodell in the front office, I think an indefinite suspension is coming down, and here's why. What's to say that additional women couldn't come forward with all of this? So if you want to say, hey, we're going to suspend Watson for 4 games or 6 games or 8 games, and there are additional allegations and there are more things that come out, the league already looks terrible here. So we'll see what happens, because these civil suits won't actually be heard in court until 2023, which is after the 2022 season, Ike. So that's kind of my thought process with all of this. But what did you make of Watson's comments earlier this week?
Well, I definitely think a suspension is coming for sure. But the NFL, they go on their own time as well, too. And they got their own team of investigators as well. So from the outside looking in, it looks real bad. From the NFL side, they're all talking, they're gathering information, and they're doing exactly what you just said, Mark. They're trying to make sure once we make our decision, will any more come out? And that's exactly what they're going to talk about with the prosecution team and the civil suits and everything else. So I just think he's going to get suspended, I think, for 8 games. They probably get him down. He probably appeal it, get it down to 6. It's going to go on in 2023, so they really have time, so say. I think the Cleveland Browns will see Deshaun Watson on the field this year. But, yeah, they're going to take their time. Everything will be done by training camp. In my mind, as far as like a decision on what they're going to do with Deshaun Watson, whether it's 8 or 6, but I think they're going to go for the 8. The NFL is going to go for the 8. He's going to appeal for the 6. He's going to get a 6-piece. And after that, man, the 2023 season, that will determine what the NFL really wants to do with Deshaun Watson, depending on what goes on in the case.
A few other things I want to make that are of note. The Texans provided a venue for at least some of Watson's appointments, a hotel and athletic club that Watson could use, and they provided some of the NDA. So the question is, how much did the Texans know? The Texans are now part of that suit, and that's no surprise to me, Ike, considering, look at the Forbes valuation of the Houston Texans as a franchise worth $3.7 billion. That's billion with a B. Now, this is also to say when the grand jury in Texas decided not to criminally indict Deshaun Watson, the Browns were not the only team lined up to want Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson went to the Browns because of the $230 million guaranteed. He didn't pick the Carolina Panthers, the Atlanta Falcons, or the New Orleans Saints. There were other suitors for Deshaun Watson. And so, again, you go back to that five-year contract, the $230 million is guaranteed. And with that suspension looming, again, if more allegations emerge, I think there's a possibility he could miss a majority or maybe even all of the 2022 season, depending on what the NFL ends up deciding to do, Ike. And it's just something that we don't know, because anything that I say right now, the scenario and the situation could change if there's more reporting done, as there is with the New York Times. And I want to make one other point too. As a journalist, for me, the moment that the New York Times or say the Washington Post gets involved, you're talking about the New York Times, 9 million people read that publication every single day. That to me rises above a level of local media covering it, or say a sports outlet like an ESPN covering it. When the New York Times gets involved, that's like a next level level of importance, just given that this just casts a terrible light on Watson, on the Browns, and just given the seriousness of the allegations.
I think you hit it on the head with the adjective light. You know, it's a dark light right now, especially when the New York Times come out and they get the posting. But I think Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns knew it could possibly happen like this. I think they're prepared for it. And like again, I say, Mark, the NFL, they go on their own time. You know, that when it comes down to them and their decisions, they don't worry about the outside noise. So I think he will get suspended again for at least 8 games. And I think next year will determine whether they're going to keep him in the NFL or not with the 2023 season.
I want to say one other thing too. Like, I remember when Watson got introduced in March and the Browns owners, Jimmy and Dee Haslam, had their own separate news conference because they were in Europe. To say that it's a bad look, and I'm going to be polite about this, would be an understatement, because they claim that they did their due diligence, yet they don't talk to any of the women involved with this. So it's just like, how can you say that when that just doesn't add up? And again, 66 different women, it just doesn't look good. And it's, you know, we'll see how this ends up playing out, Ike, because again, there are things that could emerge additionally that we just don't know right now. And I think, again, that's why the league's going to take its time, because if they say, okay, a certain amount of games and more allegations come out, it's the punishment would have to fit the crime. But again, right now, we don't know that given the legal situation. And again, that this won't actually play out in court until 2023. So I don't want to draw to any conclusions, and we'll see what ends up happening. But from the league standpoint, if you asked me, Roger Goodell asked my advice, I would say an indefinite suspension, and we'll go from there as more time goes on. But what say you? If the league came to you, Ike, and said, how would you handle this situation? What would you do?
Well, you got to understand, you know, Roger Goodell and the NFL, they're in New York. So they knew this was coming. You just don't, the New York Times just don't gather this information and all of a sudden in 2 days, they just bring it out. They knew this was coming down the pipeline. So it's who you know. And when you want to talk to the NFL, I'm sure Roger Goodell already knew. And I'm just speculating. I'm sure Roger Goodell already knew. I'm sure Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns already knew. The New York Times had their own investigation going. This was going to be made publicly. and that's what it was. So yeah, it's a bad light and it doesn't look good. But yeah, they knew, my personal opinion, they knew what was coming down the pipeline, and they know what's coming down the pipeline in the future.